Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today we will be presenting the Tentatively Selected Plan for the Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana Feasibility Study. The initial part of the presentation will take place in a little bit, and then after the initial presentation, we will break out into an open house session where you can talk to our subject matter experts from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We have one more meeting scheduled for tomorrow night at the Pontchartrain Community Center. This is the address here. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get ourselves started. I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Nate Leander. He is the Deputy Commander for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, New Orleans District.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. You know, this is important. We're here, like we said, to talk about the Tangipahoa Parish Feasibility Study and talk about the Tentatively Selected Plan. Tentatively, and I want to reiterate that, nothing is set in stone. We're here to hear from you, have a discussion with our experts. We have our team here in the room to discuss this with you and gain your knowledge. The goal of the study is to identify and potentially recommend actions that reduce flood risk for the public and safety as well as property here in the local area. The project development team is actively engaged with our non-federal sponsor, the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, or CPRA, as well as the Tangipahoa Parish government. The plan we're presenting today here features non-structural means for flood risk management that includes a combination of elevating residential structures and flood-proofing non-residential structures. Even after we elevate structures, flood risk remains, so I would encourage you all to have a plan as we are in the heart of hurricane season and listen to your state and local governments in case of any evacuation orders. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our project development team and hand this over to Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so just start with the agenda here for this evening. So we'll go through the project purpose, the National Environmental Policy Act, or otherwise known as NEPA, given an overview of the project objectives, the alternatives that were developed throughout the study, and then shift into the tentatively selected plan. So the meeting purpose is really just to present the draft integrated feasibility report, provide that background and study updates since the last public meetings that we had last fall. All right, so the National Environmental Policy Act, otherwise known as NEPA, it applies to all federal agencies and their actions. It requires us to develop and evaluate a range of alternatives to assess the potential impacts from those alternatives to the natural and human environment, and then also to coordinate with the federal and state agencies to identify ways to minimize and avoid impacts while meeting the project goals and objectives. And then the other really important piece of this is that it is sharing the decision-making process with the public and providing an opportunity for feedback that we can then use as we move into the next phase of the project. So NEPA is often considered this kind of umbrella that it integrates all the other environmental compliance acts, regulations, and laws kind of into one place. So we have to comply with all those individual components, such as the Endangered Species Act, National Historic Preservation Act, and others. So the documentation of our NEPA compliance is found in the environmental assessment, which was just recently released to the public for public review. Within that document, it'll have the purpose and need. So what is the goal that we're trying to achieve? What is why is the project needed in the study area? Then it'll go through that development of the alternatives, so you can kind of see how decisions were made up to this point. And again, it's just at that draft stage, so we welcome input. It'll also provide background on the existing conditions for the natural and human environments. That's going to be the physical, biological, economic, and social resources of significance in the study area. And then it'll summarize the potential impacts of those considered alternatives. And so lastly, like it said, the draft report is out for public review. We'll have one additional public meeting beyond the one tonight here. You'll have multiple ways to provide input, so you can write down comments on comment cards after the meeting this evening. If you want to review any of the materials and review the document, there'll be a website on the final slide that will show, it'll have a QR code that you can, if you have a smartphone, you can scan it and pull up the report. You can submit comments through to the project team's email address or through traditional mail as well. And so now I'll turn this over to Katie, who will finish with providing the background on the project. And
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's for the online.
Oh, okay. So, okay.
Use the room mic too if you want.
So this is just so folks online can hear the speaker, but can everybody in the room hear? Okay. No. Not. Okay. I'll speak up a little bit. Oh, too much. Okay. So do I need both?
You can put the other one at the same.
Okay. Okay. So, so what I'm going to do is just kind of walk everybody through the initial study overview of the study, walk everybody through how we developed our plans, and then go over what our tentatively selected plan is. So first of all, the study was authorized by WRDA, Water Resources and Development Act of 2020. The scope of this study is a flood risk management. The sponsor is here tonight, CPRA, Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. The study itself was funded through Supplemental Act Disaster, it's called DRSA, Disaster Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act in 2022. So this is a timeline of the entire study. So typically these studies are 3 years. We started in November of 2022. This is the third set of public engagement series that we've had. We had our initial back in March of 2023, and then February. And then where we're at right now is we are here, right in the center. So we selected our tentatively selected plan. We presented that internally to the Corps for approval. It was approved. We released the draft report. That's why we're here tonight, to explain the draft report, give you a summary of it, explain the tentatively selected plan, and then encourage input from the public and from everybody here tonight. So, and then our next step would be, as you are reviewing, as the public is reviewing the plan, internally the Corps is reviewing the plan upwards, right? So we're getting the feedback from you, feedback from the next layer of the Corps, and then January would be the agency decision milestone, and that's just fancy to say that that is the plan that would be selected to move forward as the recommended plan. But as Lieutenant Colonel Wander said, nothing is final, right? What we're presenting tonight, this is what we want feedback on. And the report is a draft. We are looking, this can be changed. We want feedback on that, and we'll go through some bullet points on summarizing some of the information we're looking for. So the scope of this study, like I said, is a flood risk management study. As you know, Tangipahoa Parish receives a lot of different flooding sources, right? What we're focusing really on for this study, the scope falls in line with the larger tributaries and streams. Specifically, the Corps includes FRM studies, this statement at the bottom. So rivers, streams that have discharges greater than 800 CFS at a 10% annual exceedance probability. That's AEP. Maybe you guys have heard that before. Probably more commonly what you heard are like 10-year flood events, 50-year flood events, 25-year flood, things like that. So what we're looking at, the scope of this study includes rivers, tributaries, flooding source that falls within that 800 CFS. So things like, local drainage may or may not apply to this. we do have, of course, down in the southern portion of the parish, we do account for some coastal flooding down there as well, but the majority of it is riverines, is what we're focused on. The objectives include, first and foremost, risk to public safety, life safety. So it's all about identifying the flood risks and coming up with objectives and measures to meet our objectives to reduce flood risk within the parish. So breaking that kind of out into 5 different topics, we're looking at human safety, right? Public safety, first and foremost. Looking at economic damages, so loss of economics, the impact to communities, right, from flooding damages. You guys have 2 major interstates that go right through the parish, right, intersected, crossroads, I-55 and I-12, right? So in the past, those have flooded, so causing a ripple effect on a national scale. That's a federal interest type of thing. So we are developing measures, alternatives to address that potential problem. And then objective 4 is really getting at how can we address how communities react, how they prepare for floods, how they react during floods, and then post-recovery after floods, right? So looking at the resiliency of communities. And then the 5th one takes into account looking at the demographics, or what we call like social effects. So that would include social vulnerability, disadvantaged communities. The overarching term that the Corps uses is environmental justice, EJ. You may hear that. So that is an objective that we can specifically look at those types of communities within the parish. So again, our sponsor is CPRA, and we work heavily with Tangipahoa Parish. We utilize all of their previous reports, their previous projects, plans. Both have very extremely updated, useful master plans that we have taken into account, used several of their existing projects, future projects, to pull into our project as well. We worked with the tribal nations, the state natural resource agencies, and then Tangipahoa Parish has a drainage and conservation district that was part of the team all along. And then, of course, where the parish necessarily doesn't have active projects, we worked with those local cities as well. So real quick here, like I said before, the types of flooding that occurs in the parish are, you get multiple types of flooding, riverine, coastal, and then that compound flooding area, like I said before, is kind of down, I'll show on the next slide, south of 22, right? South of the interstate, the area down south towards Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Maurepas. Again, the channels 800 CFS or greater at that 10-year flood event. So you guys, most recent flooding events, major flooding events would be March of 2016, and then again in August 2016, right? Yeah, you're shaking your head. And then Hurricane Ida. And kind of put into, we call those out tonight to kind of put in perspective the scale of those events compared to kind of what this study is looking at. So if we modeled those 2 events, the March 2016 and August 2016, like how that fell on the scale of those AEPs, the annual exceedance probability. And, sorry, that's the next slide. So the March 2016 was really kind of considered over that 100-year flood, as you would guess. Properties flooded that had never flooded before, right? And even more so in August, again, later that year, right? So that was really, considered a 500-year flood event, right? So, and then this isn't including all of them, but if you're looking at the list of, well, what tributaries did they include? These are kind of one of the major ones that we included that fit within the scope of our project. Big picture flooding, we know that Tangipahoa receives widespread low-lying flooding for the most part, right? For the most part. But there are some areas where we focused in on, right? Significant inundation along the Tangipahoa River, of course, especially there in Robert, down through that area along the Tangipahoa River and then into Lake Pontchartrain. Coastal surge, of course, affects, like I was saying before, south of I-22, the big blue inundated area, of course. And then there was what we found through our assessment. A lot of the flood damage was around the city of Robert, and especially like where Washley Creek flows into the Tangipahoa River, as well as the Natawading River on the western side along that I-55 corridor. Okay, so the first public meetings we went to scoping, that's when we wanted to hear all of, like, where you live, where does it flood, when does it flood, what are some of the projects that you have worked with, the parish with, anything like that. That was our scoping, right? And then the second, we started to move into presenting the wide range of measures that we were looking at. So this slide is a lot, but this is everything, on the left here is everything that we considered. We threw everything against the wall to look at, right? So we broke those out into 3 different types. So the top is structural measures. So structural means, the projects that can be constructed, right? A levee, detention basins, elevation of roadways. That also includes snagging and clearing, dredging, those kind of things. And then we looked at non-structural measures. So for the Corps uses that terminology, not that term non-structural. And what that means is it's kind of the opposite of structural. It's kind of confusing. So it's looking at the elevation of structures, the dry flood proofing of structures, wet flood proofing of structures, things like that. So ways that a structure can remain in place and either prevent the water from coming in, or like red flood proofing, they would modify the structure so that water can come in and come out and there's no damages, right? So, and we broke that out kind of based off of structure types. That's why they're listed a little bit more here. And then there's also other things that the parish is already doing. So that includes the flood warning systems, the evacuation notices, what else? They have the flood hazard mitigation plan, right? So they have a very active, successful, existing non-structural means, right? And then the final category that we looked at was it's nature and natural nature-based features. So that is where, in conjunction with an opportunity to provide flood risk reduction, but also include like an ecosystem component to it. So a good example would be a creation of a detention basin that also functions a wetland kind of thing. So in total, in looking through all of those, how we evaluated to implement these measures on the far right top of the slide, and it's probably hard to see, but that's the red line, if you can see it, is the parish boundaries. The orange is broken up into several polygons. Each of those polygons is a sub-basin. It's a sub-watershed. It's a smaller watershed based off of a larger watershed based off a larger watershed. That is a manageable size. Each one of those are function in and itself hydrologically. So we were able to kind of look through all of these, see which ones could be implemented within each of those sub-watersheds, and then we came up in total, for the entire parish, we came up with over 116 site-specific measures the first go-around. So this is where, everything at the wall, right? And this is kind of what we briefed on last time we were here. But, and then as we started to evaluate those and started to screen those and looking at that time we had our better H&H modeling, looking at inundation, so you start to kind of see which ones are going to rise to the top, be functional for flood risk reduction. It really came down to about 16 total subbasins that we really could focus and move forward and develop alternatives for. So that's that second picture below that. So you kind of go from the 30 total subbasins down to 16 subbasins. So again, we're still looking at structural, non-structural, and nature-based. And then we started with the structural assessments first. So looking at, so what we would look at, we had, for the most part, taking from those 9, we developed mostly detention basins in areas that we looked at, a few levees, and you'll see this all in the report, roadway elevations, and those were related to potential life safety concerns, right? People potentially being stranded when the water comes up, and also critical infrastructure. There's a firehouse down in Ponchatoula that floods occasionally. And then snagging and clearing of the Tangipahoa River, Nataubani, and Little Chapapila Creek. On the next slide, this is a very general bulleted list of how the team would evaluate each of these subbasins for the measures that we developed, and then use a screening process, right? So the Corps has a planning process. We screen them using these types of criteria. The first set here, those 4 bullets, largely were our screening criteria for all of our structural measures. So the first go around, the first set of alternatives that we developed and screened were structural. So looking at the effectiveness of each of those structural measures means the way we evaluated it is how did it meet those 5 objectives? How did those individual alternatives meet those 5 objectives? And that gets to a level of effectiveness. The second one that we largely focused on, although we considered all of these, but for the structural was efficiency, and that's kind of misleading, but what we mean by that is cost effectiveness. So that's the benefit-cost ratio. How much do these costs compared to how much benefit is it providing for meeting those objectives in the flood risk reduction? And largely those 2 screened out all of the structural measures. So at that point, which was earlier this year, I guess in February, I think it was right after we were here, we had screened all structural measures. So then we turned our focus to the non-structural. And at that, we started with a comprehensive non-structural plan at that point, parish-wide. And specifically out of those list of measures that I had under the non-structural, we determined that 2 types of specific measures. So suggesting elevation of residential structures. So elevation would apply just to homes, to residential structures. And then flood proofing as well. And so flood proofing would be is recommended on non-residential structures, so businesses, commercial structures, things like that. These graphics are just a simple graphic to show, just a summary of, elevation would be if a single unit or mobile homes are included, they would be elevated up to 13 feet. So that's the flood depth that they could be elevated. Anything beyond that is considered, unstructurally safe. And then the flood proofing would be applied to structures that receive flooding up to 3 feet. So that would be, that's kind of what those graphics show there. So the way that we approached developing a comprehensive non-structural plan for the entire parish was not looking at individual structures, right? There's over 3,200 structures parish-wide. So instead of looking at individual structures, we developed aggregations. So that's a fancy term just to say areas, just groupings. And that's what these green polygons are. We really need to change that color. So in total, and the way we developed those was kind of grouping areas based off of similar flooding characteristics initially. So we looked at, this area receives all the flooding from the Tangipahoa River, or Little Chapapila Creek floods this area, so we can develop non-structural, similar non-structural measure for this aggregation, for this grouping. So instead of looking, at every individual structure, we broke it down into these groupings. So initially, we did that on a larger scale. We had 100 total aggregations, and then we redefined the way that we decided to aggregate, and we, instead of just solely basing our grouping criteria on flooding characteristics, we included other things such as what we are terming other social effects. So that would take into account community characteristics, how the community is, community cohesion, how we can gain benefits from these other social effects. So I'll go into that in just a second. But based off of the first aggregation methodology, we developed our first plan, and that is Plan 1. That is our NED plan. NED stands for National Economic Plan, Development Plan. So this is very common for the Corps, right? We have to have the plan that maximizes the benefits for the best cost. So that is the monetary benefits plan, right? So, and what that looks like, this is the plan presented in the draft report. It includes almost 600 structures for the entire parish. Of those 600 structures, about 540 are residential. So we are, the plan includes elevation of those 539 structures, and then flood-proofing of 58 non-residential structures. And the map, it's hard to map these things, but the dots, that's what you're kind of seeing over there, are representative of general areas of structures that are included in the plan. So then the team began to look at non-monetary benefits, right? How do we include some of the areas that may not be in that NED plan because they just aren't included in those monetary benefits, right? So that's when we pulled in, like I was saying before, like the community cohesion, the critical infrastructure, looking at social vulnerability. So the team used the Center for Disease Control Social Vulnerability Index, which is very commonly used in core studies, and that ranks percentages of communities parish-wide, actually US-wide, United States-wide. We got the data for Tangipahoa Parish, and we considered anything over 85% to be medium or high social vulnerability. So that played into the way that we developed alternatives as well. So using, this is how so the graphic on the lower right is straight out of the CDC website, and this is just a breakdown of those themes under the Social Vulnerability Index. So it looks at socioeconomic status, household characteristics, racial and ethnic minority status, housing type, transportation, things like that. So collectively, the core term, you'll see this in the report, is other social effects. So that simply means the non-monetary benefits, right? How do we create a plan that includes those areas that weren't necessarily included in the NED plan? So we created a total of 3 other plans, and this plan, Plan 3B, is what we are presenting as our tentatively selected plan. So this plan maximized the NED benefits, the costs versus benefits, as well as pulled in the other social effects benefits. So this plan is presented as the plan. Again, it's a draft, but eventually maybe this would be the recommended plan. Includes a little less than 1,100 structures parish-wide, so we're almost doubling the amount of structures included as compared to the NED plan. Of that, the breakout is a little over 1,000 residence homes, and then 87 non-residential structures. And then the map there is on the right. Again, this is, the dots are the structure, general area of structures. So one thing to note, so the reason why we're presenting both the NED plan and this total net benefits plan, Plan 3B, so again, this is our tentatively selected plan. However, if the Corps picks a plan that's not the NED plan, if a team picks a plan that's not the NED plan, then we have to seek approval through the Corps chain. So it goes all the way to the headquarters of the Corps. We have done that, and the approval is pending. But we are still continuing to move forward. So if that approval is not granted, then our TSP, our plan, would become the NED plan. So when you're thinking about the potential plans for the parish, it could be either or. However, this is the one that we are pushing forward as our tentatively selected plan. Again, it maximizes those NED benefits, and it includes our other social effect benefits. And this is always good to put, right? This is a draft plan. We will take, as we progress into the next phase, which is the feasibility design phase, we'll further refine things such as costs for the non-structural measures, elevations, things like that. So structures that, I guess, to put it simply, structures that may be included in the plan now, perhaps may not be included in the ultimate plan, or vice versa. There could be more structures in the ultimate plan once we start refining this. And this is a very common process. So I just have one slide on this, a very quick summary of costs, benefits, and then the lower two lines that you're seeing here really kind of tell the story about the TSP in difference to the NED. This is what's including the structure count. We want to maximize as many homeowners and businesses that we can get in our plan. So the green is Plan 1. That's the NED. If you're looking at the total number of structures, right, it's 597 versus the yellow, which is the TSP, the total net benefits. That's it's almost doubling the amount of structures, right? And then also that final bottom line there, it's almost doubling the amount of structures that are in those socially vulnerable areas as well. Okay, so just a couple more slides. Again, this is kind of a schedule slide, just kind of presented a little differently. Again, where we're at right now, we have our draft report released, which was 2 Fridays ago. We are in that 45-day comment period, so that's what we're here tonight. We're trying to summarize the report for you, gather, be here to answer any questions in person, have conversations with you, encourage input. Our next milestone is January, and again, that's that decision. That's where we would get your comments. The Corps is also concurrently reviewing the report. They'll give us the comments as well, and then we would come up with an actual decision to move forward. And then looking forward, it's kind of reviews in between there, and then the final Chiefs report would be mid-2026. Okay, so last slide, input that we need from you. We're just kind of throwing out some ideas to maybe generate some brainstorming. Does this TSP meet the needs of the community? Are there additional problems related to flooding in the project area that may not have been captured by the non-structural components of the plan? Are there any modifications that could be made to the TSP to further reduce the flooding in the Tangipahoa Parish? And then is there anything in the draft report that may need explanation, further explanation, that we can include in the final report, right? This is just a draft. This is not the final. This is the time to think it through and incorporate any comments. So this is the way to do that. We have 3 different types of methods. First and foremost, this is the link to the report. You can download it. You can view it. That's how to get it. Tonight, you can write comments on the comment card. We have out in the lobby, just in the welcome desk right there. Here's our email. We have a study-specific email that goes directly to the team. We see those. Submit a comment in there or questions anytime. And then you can simply mail it, right? People still do that. You can write it out, mail it. It goes to us in St. Louis District, and then that would be incorporated. So I think Lane had the deadline on his slide, but just to reiterate, it's 45 days from that August 9th. So the deadline to submit comments is the 23rd of September. And again, if you have a smartphone, the QR code is there. That'll pull up all the information. Okay, that concludes the presentation. And then at this point, we'll take down the presentation, and the team is here. We can break it up. We'll kind of have an open house and field any questions and conversations that you'd like to discuss with the team. Thanks again for coming out tonight.
I have a question. The 1006